Right, good morning. Welcome to Elevenses. I'm a minute late here this morning. Got a packed show for you again today. Got some information about what's going on in other countries with the COVID-19 response and how motorcycling is being dealt with in the Philippines by wearing screens. Sunderland City Council's tackling nuisance motorcyclists. Jersey's having a problem with boy racers. Mahindra have shut down a US electric bike maker in a bit of a reverse decision from what I've been talking about in recent days. Aprilia are building a 150cc bike in China. And after a serious filtering crash, a rider has vowed to become a first responder. And I'll be talking about the risks of filtering in our better biking issue at the end of the show. So don't forget, you're watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams here of Survival Skills. If you have anything that you want to add, comments, questions, ask away. I'll get back to you when I go off air at the end of the show. If you've got any suggestions for future items, I'm more than happy to hear them and I'll try and fit them in. That could be the skills item if you're interested in something to talk about specifically. By all means, drop me a line and I will try to show you or give you some advice best as I can. Okay, so let's crack on with the show. The first thing I want to say is basically I want to talk about this what's going on in the Philippines. Now, it may seem a long way away from us. It may not seem particularly interesting, but the thing about the Philippines is that it's an example of a country which has a lot of motorcycle taxis. Now, around the world, motorcycle taxis actually offer a means of getting around effectively and cheaply. You may remember that Virgin Bike ran a taxi service in London for a while, but elsewhere in other parts of the world, motorcycle taxis really are very widely used indeed. And there's been a ban on carrying passengers on these bikes. Now, that's created not only a lot of friction from motorcycle taxi riders, but it's also caused a big problem for people who actually still need to get around the big cities in the Philippines. And it's also affected families because a lot of families use motorcycles not only to get to work, but do things like shopping and carrying kids to school. Anyway, that ban has caused, as I say, caused a lot of problem. But the Defence Secretary, a chap called Delfin Lorenzana, has now announced that riders can use this barrier that you can see on screen in front of you, which is worn like a backpack on the shoulders, and it basically provides a makeshift barrier between driver and the passenger. The other thing that this screen has is a grab handle, so that rather than hold on to the rider's waist, the passenger can actually hold on to the screen, and the screen is then firmly attached to the rider. So it has a lot of benefits for both rider and passenger. And basically, Lorenzana told reporters in a text message that effective immediately, the above barriers between motorcycle driver and passengers are hereby approved, and then went on to say that the pillion riding is only approved for couples who could prove they're married or living together. Now, have a think about that for a moment. If you're living together, why do you need a barrier between you while you're on a motorcycle? I'm not the only one to have spotted that, fairly obviously. Senate President pro tempore, Ralph Recto, also asked, what's the use of a barrier when couples hold hands getting to the motorcycle and kiss each other after the ride? So quite clearly, it's not only the UK government which struggles with joined up thinking on COVID-19. It's not clear whether this shield will be extended to the use of taxi drivers, because obviously they and their passengers are the ones who will benefit most. Now, still to come in the show, we'll be talking about how Mahindra has shut down an electric bike maker in the US. Aprilia is building a 150cc bike in China. How a rider is responding to a serious filtering crash by wanting to become a health worker himself. And we'll finish off with our better biking tip, and I'll be talking about the risks of filtering in the light of that crash. But out in Sunderland, the police have teamed up with the city council there to use a long lens camera to find the right picture for you. I've got it here somewhere. There it is. To tackle what they described as nuisance motorcyclists. Now, what they say is that these riders have been putting walkers and cyclists at risk of injury by riding on public paths and cycle paths across the city, and they're also damaging public and private land by riding off-road. And so, Operation Eagle, the council's Area East Committee have paid for this £800 telephoto lens, which can help them take photos of nuisance riders from a distance and then identify them. Basically, the crackdown's already had some impact. More than a dozen riders have been identified. 8 have been handed warning notices, and 1 motorcycle has actually been seized by the police. Neighbourhood Sergeants, I should say, Craig Sheriff, got my legal titles the wrong way around there, has welcomed the early results and says anybody found to be involved with motorcycle disorder will be dealt with robustly. And he says, we understand the significant corrosive impact that antisocial behaviour can have on the communities we serve, and that's why we're working closely with the council to tackle motorcycle disorder across the city. So basically, yes, they can get in there with their long lens from a distance, whereas they might otherwise be involved in some kind of a chase or a barrier system. So it has some advantages. But as an aside, purely personal point of view here, I always find it rather disappointing that these stories always identify the nuisance as being caused by a motorcyclist or a biker. Although it's surprising, we have to have a term for these people. It's true that the public perception of motorcyclists is a million light years away from what it was when I started riding in the late 70s and even into the early 80s, when it was entirely a common thing to go to a pub or find a B&B. I'd had a sign outside saying something like "No bikers," or "Bikers not welcome," or "No leather jackets." That was a favourite way of deterring motorcyclists. We don't see that anymore. And if you've never seen anything like that, then you'd be quite shocked, I suspect, at how negative the perception of motorcyclists was back in the 70s and early 80s. But there's still a generally negative view of motorcycling, and the terminology in stories like this does little to help. We can't do much about the idiots who use 2 wheels to have their idea of fun. So I don't know what the answer is, but welcome suggestions on a postcard. Meanwhile, oddly enough, they're having a similar kind of problem in Jersey, where they are cracking down on a growing boy racer culture, as they put it. Jersey, as you probably know, has a blanket low speed limit. I think it's 30 across the island on open roads, and probably I think it's 20 in towns. And they also have a very restricted land area, which means there's not a lot of roads that you can go riding or driving on. But they're still planning on introducing mobile speed cameras and also tougher penalties for breaching the speed limit by 30 miles per hour will be debated by their governing body, which I believe is called the States. You can correct me on that if I'm wrong. One thing that both riders and drivers have been adopting recently is reflective film that supposedly cannot be seen by day, but can allegedly make it almost impossible to read the J number plate at night. Now, I have to admit that I saw this being punted out at the motorcycle show some years ago. Fully there in public view, somebody selling this stuff to the public, allegedly making the thing speed camera safe. One quick flash of my digital camera, which I just bought at the time, very proud of, took a picture with a perfectly legible number on it. So whether it works or not, I'm not entirely sure, but obviously riders are trying it. But what other riders have been doing is tilting the number plates at an angle, which means they cannot be detected by speed cameras. Or captured on dash cams, because that's another factor here. Others are turning off their registration plate lights so that they can't be read in the dark. And basically Operation Canvas is cracking down on these dodges, and it will also target anybody who makes illegal modifications to cars and bikes, including exhausts and suspension, as well as registration plates. And Paul Ryan, who's the inspector in charge of road policing out there, he says a number of complaints has increased significantly during the lockdown period. That'll be people not having anything to do during the day and night, but also taking advantage of those quieter roads for sure. So far, 2 riders have been caught with their number plates tilted at an odd angle. But here's the irony. This is the bit I really liked about this particular story. The proposals for using vehicle-mounted mobile speed cameras, similar to what we have here in the UK in police cars, and for tougher sentencing, came from the Constable of St John, a chap called Chris Taylor, who earlier this week was due to appear on trial in the magistrate's court, charged with dangerous driving. So, okay, don't forget you're watching Kevin Williams here and Survival Skills with the Elevenses show. Set a reminder, and you can catch up with this show every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. If you miss it live, then you can follow it either later or here on Facebook, or you can hop over to my YouTube channel and visit it over there. Right, what else do we have to talk about? Well, Mahindra, who you may recall are an Italian motorcycle manufacturer, have pulled the plug on a subsidiary of theirs, which they own in California. It's called Genzi, and they have been building electric 2-wheelers, producing e-bikes and scooters, which they sell exclusively in the US market. And they just announced that, rather somewhat to my surprise, I've got a picture of one of the scooters here. They're in the process of liquidating the existing stocks, and they will shut down the business completely within the next 6 months. The intellectual property will be used by Mahindra Electric, or some other brand within the Mahindra group, apparently. But so they say they're not looking to exit the US market completely. And they also sell farm equipment there, and they also sell an SUV, which apparently is currently being investigated by Jeep over there for copyright infringement of some sort. So, yeah, I'm a little bit surprised as to the rationale behind this decision, because e-bikes and e-scooters are taking off. So why they've shut this this is business down is a good question. Don't know the answers for that one either. They say that the business has been struggling, and they're not selling the volume that they wanted to. But it does seem that this is probably not a good time to shut it down, but to actually just give it another few months and see what happens as people look to use alternative forms of transport. Okay, so I have another bike story coming up for you too, and this one's an interesting little one as well. This is a motorcycle which is being built and labelled as an Aprilia. Now have a quick look at this. Feast your eyes on this little beastie. It's called the Pagani 150 Cafe Racer. Now it's quite a nice looking little machine. It's destined for the Indian market to start with, but where's it being built? Well, the answer is it's been built in China. Now, I mentioned the other day that increasingly numbers of motorcycles that we consider to be European or are actually not being built in Europe at all. Even Japanese motorcycles are built in China too. I mentioned that the Suzuki 125 has been built in China for, getting on for 20 years now. The other bike, which obviously jumps out at me, has just slipped right out of my mind. I just was about to tell you what it was, and I've just completely forgotten. Can I remember? I can't. All right, pass on that one, but trust me. Oh yeah, Benelli, the Benelli range of motorcycles. Yeah, Italian brand, built entirely in China. So this particular bike is powered by a Zhongshen 150cc single cylinder engine. Puts out about 15 horsepower, so it should give it a top speed of somewhere around about 75 miles an hour. It's 6-speed gearbox, liquid cooled. What else do you need to know about it? Not a lot else really, except that it's sort of got an 70s, 80s style cafe racer, endurance racer look about it, which I actually rather like. I would be quite happy to ride something like that with a slightly bigger engine in it. It would, I suspect, float my boat quite nicely. Twin shocks at the rear, inverted front fork, pedal discs. It has a lot of modern styling cues, but I just like that fairing. It just looks somehow rather sharper than the sort of race bike style fairings that we get on models at the moment. It's also badged up as a Mondial, which is another brand which is also owned by Piaggio, as is Aprilia. Okay, whether it'll make it over to Europe or the US, I very much doubt. It's probably destined entirely for the Asian market, but I think it's a bit of a shame that it doesn't actually get out to us. Okay, so the last story that I want to bring to you is about a 21-year-old who was involved in a serious filtering crash. He basically has put that behind him after a long recovery, and he wants to become a paramedic. Now, he's 21 years old now, and he was 19 at the time of the filtering crash, and it basically left him unable to walk without crutches for over a year. And not only did he face some fairly serious financial hardship, his recovery was pain-racked, and he was forced to learn to walk again. So that's why he's keen to give something back. And in an interview with the Winsford Guardian, he says, once lockdown is lifted, I'm going to hammer the hell out of training to be a paramedic. I've been inspired by the amazing paramedics who helped me, and now I want to be able to help others. When it comes to the NHS, you can't say thank you enough. He was left with basically a badly broken left leg. It had to be manipulated to fit a metal frame, and then it all had to be straightened. Although he secured £40,000 from the other driver's insurance company that settled his debts, the physical consequences of this collision included severe pain that's stopped him sleeping at night, and anxiety and depression. But he's now back on his feet, which is good news. And I'm sure we all wish Josh the very best for his future. But I can't help but think that not crashing in the first place would have been by far the better option. So let's see what we know about filtering crashes generally and what we can do to avoid taking the same somersault that Josh did. Now, this is basically taken directly from my Ride to Work Survival Urban course briefing. Let's start with the risks of filtering. Basically, the best place to find out how risky any activity is when we're biking is by going and having a looking at accident stats. Although they don't tell us about minor spills, frankly, we tend to pick the bike up and ride off from minor spills. So we might have a bit of, a bit of surface damage. We might have a bit of cosmetic damage to the motorcycle, but it's unlikely that we've been physically hurt or that the motorcycle suffered a severe impact. So the accident stats do a useful thing. They tell us where the bad accidents are. Now, not surprisingly, junctions dominate in casualty figures, but the dangers of filtering will surprise many urban riders. Judging by the behaviour of many of the riders I see out and about on the roads here in London and in other towns, they've never given the risks a thought. Speed and our perception of it and other people's perception of what we're doing is always a tricky one. Now, when we have crashes, it's more often than not, it's recorded that the motorcyclist was driving in excess of the speed limit or too fast for the conditions. Now, speed limit is one thing, but what does too fast for the conditions mean? Well, it's pretty obvious when you think about it that if the rider crashed here, he didn't crash 10 seconds earlier. And so his speed 10 seconds earlier wasn't inappropriate. That's why he didn't crash 10 seconds earlier, but it was inappropriate at the precise moment it crashed. And if you think about that and extrapolate it back, what it basically means is that the rider's speed was not inappropriate at any moment on that journey. And it probably wasn't inappropriate on the journeys that rider had been undertaking before the one that actually resulted in the crash. So the rider's speed must have been appropriate. It might not have been legal, but it dealt with the problems that the rider faced. So what we have to actually ask ourselves is what changed? That's the really important point. It's what changed at that particular moment when the rider crashed. Why was the rider carrying too much speed into this particular situation when he wasn't carrying too much speed into all the other myriad of different situations that he must have passed on the run up to that crash? Let me turn that banner off. It's still going at the bottom there, distracting everybody. So why might we not realize that our speed is now too high? Well, one possibility, and this is a fairly significant one, is that what happened in front of Josh was a situation that the rider had never experienced before. And that's a common problem with newish riders. Don't forget, he was 19 years old at the time of the crash. He probably didn't have a great deal of experience. So the situation to him appeared fairly normal. It appeared to be just business as usual. And then something changed very suddenly indeed. So it wasn't the speeding that was the problem. The inability to react was the problem was actually adapting his speed to the developing situation. And that means either seeing it on time or anticipating it early enough that we know that we can deal with it if it happens. So that's when the mistake over speed comes into play in a lot of filtering crashes. And so it's worth bringing out the old rule about speed. If you double your speed, you basically quadruple your stopping distance. So if your speed starts off there and you double your speed, then your actual stopping distance quadruples. It becomes much, much bigger. Now, from the report into the crash, we can figure out roughly what happened. He was filtering past what was described as single file, slow moving traffic towards a roundabout. So what went wrong? Well, a car in the queue pulled out to do a U-turn. Now, let's have a think about that. Why would anybody pull a U-turn on the way up to a roundabout? You could simply drive around the roundabout if you were going the wrong way. So occasionally people do daft things like that, but there's often a reason that people pull U-turns in queues. And that's because the queue is not normal for that particular location at that particular time of day. So that's my guess is what was happening there. Once drivers are stuck in queues, they know, if they know that queue is going to be there every day because it's there every time they travel along that road, then generally speaking, they accept it. But if it's an unusual queue that we're stuck in, that's when we start to think about how we're going to get past that queue or out of that queue. Basically, the driver is going to make the same decision that the rider is going to make to avoid being stuck. The difference is that it's difficult to filter on four wheels. Not impossible. I was in a bit of a hurry to get a delivery done one night in London before the office shut for a Friday night, and so I ended up filtering most of the way up of Regent Street in a van. But okay, most drivers won't go that far, but motorcyclists will filter. So the driver will look for an alternative option, and that's to turn around, go back the other way and find an alternative route. So they make the U-turn. Now, I hear a chorus of people saying, because every time I go through this, that's exactly what people will say, the driver should look. Well, yes, they do. But there are some issues about why they don't see motorcycles. The first one is, can the bike actually be seen? If you've got a wide vehicle behind the car, you can look in the mirror and the road can appear to be clear. But if the rider is hugging the queue, rather than sitting out wide where the rider can see and be seen, then the driver has looked and seen what appears to be a clear bit of road. The other time this is a problem is when we are filtering around a gentle left-hand bend. If you think about the lines of sight, the vehicles ahead of us are constantly blocking the view of anybody sitting in the queue. Now, we can often see over the top of cars. We are sitting that bit higher up on a bike, but think where the driver's mirror is. It's way down low. It's sort of down almost sort of a wrist level. That's why your handlebars bonk on mirrors as you drive past cars. So he's got a much lower view of the same situation from the opposite angle. So he's not going to see the motorcycle in the same way that we can see over the top of the cars in front and catch a glimpse of what's going on. So in both cases, that rider will be in the driver's blind spot. The driver can look as hard as they like. They can stick a head out the window if they want to. And if the bike is not where it's visible, they will not see you because they cannot see you. So, okay, second thing, once the car has started to turn and it's at a bit of an angle to the road, then think about where the driver's mirrors are pointing. They're out of play. They're now angled in the wrong direction. This is something I wrote about in one of my earliest columns on for the road. Driver can look as hard as he likes again, but if the mirror is aimed in the wrong direction, there is no way the driver can see the motorcycle coming up. And if you think about the view out of the average car, when you glance over your shoulder and try to see behind you, you have a big pillar alongside your head, the B pillar holding the roof up in the middle. And then behind your head, there is the C pillar, which is supporting the rear of the roof. Now, you sit in the average car and have a look to see what you can see out of the rear window. There is very little view outside of the car through the offside rear window. So once the car starts turning, what happens next? Well, where are most of us be focused? What do I tell riders who are turning in tight spaces? Look up, pick your head up, look around the corner. Where do they look? Down under the front wheel. Well, a driver will do very much the same. They'll look usually at the corner of the car that they're trying to turn past. So their attention is now focused in front of them rather than what's coming up behind them. So they'll make that maneuver thinking about, can they avoid the car? Once they have avoided the car, then they have a bit of freedom to look. But the chances are they won't anticipate something overtaking the queue behind them. What in fact they will do is they'll look the other way. They'll look to their left, not to their right, towards the approaching motorcycle. They'll be looking left. And if they see an empty space, that's when they complete the maneuver. Lots of reasons that the driver doesn't see the motorcycle, and quite possibly the U-turning car was an eventuality that the rider had never experienced before. Now, I've bored you many times by telling you that I before I trained up as a motorcycle trainer, I was 16 years as a 500,000 miles as a motorcycle courier, and I was dodging incidents like this all the time. But once upon a time, I was as green as Josh. No one taught me what could go wrong when filtering. I had to learn by doing it myself, and I had to learn by getting it wrong. And I was lucky. I was always, I suppose, a bit hyperactive when it came to imagining nasty crashes, so I was always fairly cautious. But I actually had this self-same collision myself with a U-turning vehicle in a queue of slow-moving traffic on the South Embankment in London. But I wasn't blatting down the outside empty lane. I was actually proceeding fairly cautiously, so cautiously that when the car, or it was a van, actually did turn across in front of my path, I was able to hit the brakes and virtually brought the bike to a complete standstill before I hit it. I hit it at less than walking pace. The impact wasn't even hard enough to dent the car or the van. All it did was it left a sort of a rubbery scuff mark on the paintwork, and the bike simply toppled over sideways. I just lost my balance when it stopped a bit more suddenly than I was anticipating, and the damage to the bike was confined to a broken indicator. But what about Josh? Well, he says he sounded the horn. Well, okay, fair enough, but obviously it wasn't enough in time. But then he and his motorcycle were thrown clear over the bonnet of the car. Now, if you go and look at some of the impact videos, which are done to promote the use of airbags, you've generally done somewhere around about 40 to 50k, so 20, maybe 30 miles per hour. And you watch what happens. What you'll see is the whole front end of the bike crumples. The forks bend, the front wheel folds in, and that absorbs a lot of the impact. Now, what you'll see is the rear wheel rises off the ground in these impacts, but the bike then falls back down on the side of the car that it hit. So if the motorcycle was thrown clear over the car, you can draw your own conclusions about the impact speed. And that accounts for his injuries. So put two together, a developing situation which the rider had not foreseen, quite probably because he'd never seen it before, and an excess of speed and an inability to stop in the distance when that car did turn. Now, I've no doubt Josh will not have that crash again, but and touch wood, neither have I. I wouldn't say that a U-turning vehicle in front of me is a daily occurrence as I ride through London, but I probably have to take evasive action of some sort once a week, even if it's just a gentle glide to a halt to let somebody complete the U-turn. And one thing I realized as I was working was that I could see this crash coming a lot easier than the driver could see it coming. So rather than complain about the driver making bad decisions, I simply took the responsibility on myself to stay out of trouble. And even now I keep a close eye on black cabs and now Uber drivers as well whenever I spot them. And so I'm particularly cautious whenever I'm passing alongside a queue, which isn't normally there. The trouble is that, as Josh found out, learning the hard way hurts. And riders significantly underestimate the risks of filtering, in my experience. Casualty stats from London show that it is actually a surprisingly dangerous manoeuvre. Back in 2002, the Bike Safe team told us that getting on for half of all the riders killed in London had been filtering when things went wrong. And one of the reasons is obviously that we are very vulnerable if we topple off the bike, even in a low speed crash like mine, where I just fell over sideways. If something had been trying to pass both of us at that time, I could have been under the wheels of that vehicle. So wouldn't it be nice if we had some training to help us understand just when our speed might become inappropriate and what kind of filtering collisions we should be looking out for, rather than just learning on the job? Well, actually, you do have some help here, and it's my Ride to Work urban course. And this is exactly one of the scenarios that I'm covering. So have a think about what you're doing. If you are in London and you are moving towards commuting to work on a bike, then have a think about doing a course with me, because I will take you through most of the serious hazards. I will show you how to recognize these situations and how to deal with them. If you're too far to reach me here in town, well, I can run a 1 hour online coaching session for you. It'll cover exactly the same kind of theory that I've been talking about already, and it'll give you the kind of observations that I would hope you would be able to make, and the kind of responses that I've been talking about too. But just to finish off, if there's one tip that I would give you that saved my bacon a few times, it's never to assume that the vehicle that you're passing will go straight on. Every single vehicle that you're filtering past could potentially pull into the space that we're intending to occupy ourselves. And if we start thinking that way, then our speed comes down fairly dramatically, but our reaction time in an emergency also goes up fairly dramatically. And that is the way to help yourself filter, become more crash aware. Right, okay, amazingly, we've done our 30 minutes again. It flies by. We'll be back on Sunday. No idea with what at the moment. I shall see what news stories develop over the next few days. Don't forget, if you have enjoyed the show, you can head over to my coffee page, and you can become a supporter over there. Supporting me for as little as £3 a month will open up access to all sorts of articles from my Facebook archive. They're going up, new ones going up all the time. There are well over 100 things to read over there at the moment, and more are coming soon. If you become a subscriber, then you not only open up the supporter access, but you also get access to elements from my training courses, which are available again for £3 a month. Right, once more, thank you very much indeed for tuning in to my show. I hope you've enjoyed it, and don't forget, we're back on Sunday. Thanks very much. See you again soon.